Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur, and today we are breaking down Inter Miami's salary release information. It came out last week. Lots of interesting tidbits that we should go through, and what does it mean for this team? What can we learn from this release? What can we learn from these numbers? And what can it tell us about what Inter Miami should do moving forward? I think there's some really interesting conversations here. We're going to talk about them, but before all of that, Saur, thanks for joining me. How are you feeling today, my man?
Feeling fantastic as always, but this is always like an eerie part of the year where there's a pre-release sentiment about the players and then a post-release sentiment about the players. And as soon as these salaries drop, we just change our perception about the players based on what they're earning and what they're not. Is it fair? Maybe in some cases it is, and in other cases it helps us value the players a lot more. And we have a lot of interesting conversations to talk about this afternoon. But I know this for you is your favorite part of the week, just talking about the rosters, talking about how we're making the roster work. And I'm excited. We have a couple of interesting conversations lined up. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. We should set the ground rules for this conversation. One, we're recording this on Saturday, the day before the Portland Timbers game. We're not going to be available to do a midweek episode in the midweek this coming week, so we thought we'd record one ahead of time, and this is, I think, a worthy conversation to have. So we don't know what happened in the Portland game, and if someone had an amazing game that completely changes the narrative on their season, forgive us, we didn't see it yet. So that's, I think, important to mention. This is pre-recorded. Second of all, this is going to be an in the weeds type of episode. And if that's not your forte, we totally understand. You don't have to listen to it, but we're going to be talking about salary numbers and U22 spots and allocation money and all that kind of stuff. So if that's not your forte, I get it. We'll see you in the next one. Lastly, I think that's it. Is there anything else we should preface with?
If anyone's changing our perception after the Portland game, that means they've had a monster game on Sunday, and I'm all for that. So I highly doubt one game's going to change a lot of things, but here we are.
And the other reason why this matters is, if you go to Manchester City or PSG or Real Madrid or Barcelona, they can spend, well, maybe not Barcelona, but for the most part, they can spend whatever money they want. And the rules on how they spend their money is pretty lax, and they can bring in players at all sorts of salary numbers. And they're bringing in great players that are easy to move on in case they have to. Maybe they'll have to eat some money, but it's not like a player in Real Madrid won't find another home. The MLS is different for various reasons. One, not every MLS player has an obvious place to go after. Like, if you go to Real Madrid, you have a level of prestige that other clubs will want. I don't know if that's always true with the MLS. Second, and by extension, that means it's not always easy to get good value for players if you have to move them on. If they don't work in the MLS, you can end up being stuck with them or forced to take a huge loss. Second, this is a salary cap league, and I think this is the most important thing. Value for money is so important because each team is working with a very similar amount of money. Real Madrid, they can afford to make mistakes because they will outspend and bring in another player. And if this guy doesn't work, the next transfer window, they'll just bring in another guy. Not the case in the MLS and not at Inter Miami, where we have to work within the confines of the MLS roster rules, which means you have 3 DPs, you have 3 U22 DPs, and everyone else is fighting to make sure that they are good value for money. And that's salary, that's transfer fee, it's the amortized value of all three, or both of those combined. Like, all of those things matter, because if you fill up with a player and that player is not living up to the value that you're putting into them, you are no longer able to spend that money elsewhere and kind of upgrade or fill holes or whatever. Like, it is a big deal to commit a certain amount of money or cap space or cap charge to a certain player, especially if it's a large number, and especially if it's a player that might not be particularly easy to move on if it doesn't work out in the way you want. So that's important, and that's why I think it's important to have conversations about this. I think it's important to keep the team accountable, to keep the front office accountable, to keep the scouting department accountable, and to ensure as Inter Miami fans that we are trying to put the best roster out there, because as great as I think this roster is, and as much as I think there's some really good players on this team, if they're not living up to the cap charge, it becomes a problem, especially if you find yourself with holes elsewhere. So it is important it's ultra important for the front office to be thinking about, but I think it's interesting and important for the fans to keep this in mind. And I also think, most importantly, how much a player is costing your team should affect how you view their performances. And so if a guy is making as much money as he can without being a DP, you expect them to be good. And if they are not good, I think it's more worthy of criticism than a guy who's making the minimum salary or is on his second year in an academy deal, something like that. Like, the expectations for those high earners has to be higher than players that aren't making as much, because they are preventing you from getting players to, fill the hole or replace them with or whatever. They are making it more difficult to operate, so they have to deliver. And if they don't, it is worth criticizing them. I think that's like one of my strongest beliefs about the MLS is, if you are making the big bucks, you have to deliver the big performances on a regular basis. And if not, we're going to call you out for it.
Yeah, and I think just from a roster building perspective as well, one thing we should note as fans is there's a lot of frustration around MLS salary caps, and it's valid. It does hamper the league in general to be as competitive as some of the leagues that can go out and buy players as much as they want, depending on how much their revenue is. But I think in the MLS, that salary cap creates a bit of a handicap for these front offices and these teams. And I think there's a lack of appreciation as to how difficult it almost is to create a roster that can be competitive over the long run. So as we go into this, I think it's important to understand that some of these decisions not only just impact what you can do in this season, but would also eventually impact what you can do in the next season or the season after sometimes as well. And that's why it's hard to do. It's a chess puzzle almost, where front offices have to put their minds together to make all the pieces work. And I feel like one of the conversations we're going to have is how one decision that you make could impact another decision. So it's not an independent signing that you're making. It's not an independent salary in a vacuum. It impacts the roster as a whole, and that can hamper your roster building for not just a year, but maybe the longer term as well. So there's a lot that goes in behind the scenes. There's a lot that goes into the decision making, and that's why I think we enjoy these episodes so much, because it's an intricate balance to make sure that your roster is competitive. And one player salary could potentially tilt that in the favor or against the favor of the roster itself. So super interesting. And maybe we should now talk about the specifics.
Yeah, and the last thing is, it gives us some insight in what the team is possibly capable of doing moving forward, who is most likely to move on, who is maybe you can get the most value for trading, or whatever it is. So it also gives us some insight on what the team might do next. Okay, there's 29 players under contract in Inter Miami. I'm going to run through these 9 real quick, as very easy to not have to talk about for the rest of this conversation. So, if there's anyone here you want to talk about, that's fine, but I'll just run through them quickly. Santi Morales, Luis Barraza, who's the third string goalkeeper, Israel Boatwright, Tyler Hall, Cesar Abadia-Reda, Daniel Pinter, Alexander Shaw, and Preston Planbeck are all in that super low, either at the minimum salary or just above that, contracts. These are mostly homegrown players, aside from Luis Barraza, who came in as a third choice goalkeeper. They're all making just almost nothing.
Minimum,
In fact,
yeah.
most of them are on the supplemental roster, so they don't affect anything at all. I think we can maybe put those guys aside for the rest of this conversation.
Yeah, good thing Inter Miami's bringing these youngsters through, but yes, I don't think there's much to talk about here.
Then there's another segment that I don't know if we need to talk about a lot specifically, but we might come back and reference this. These are the guys that are making not that much money. They're on their second contracts, but they're mostly homegrown. And this is David Ruiz, Ian Frey, Noah Allen, and Yannick Bright. These 4 are all making $450,000 or less, between $400,000 and $450,000. Yannick Bright's at $464,000. So these are not big commitments for players that have come through the academy and are impacting the first team. I also feel like we can put that group aside until we need to come back and reference them.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to talk about them again, but it's a separate segment of the group, as you said.
And then you have the group that I think is the most important to get right. This is the hardest part, but it's the most important to get right. And these are the guys that are in the TAM zone that you need to give allocation money to, that are making significant wages, that had a transfer fee involved. And these are the guys that they don't have any sort of, they're not DPs, they're not U22s. There's no cut in their cap charge. You have to pay them the full amount. And these are the guys that I think are most important to fill your team out with quality players. And if you get it wrong, it's the hardest to move off of, because they're making a lot of money, they're not producing at the value you want, and they end up being players you have trouble moving on because they haven't built their value. This group includes Maxi Falcone, Luis Suarez, Dane St. Clair, Mikael, Gonzalo Lujan, Tadeo Allende, Facundo Mora, and Sergio Reguilon. All those guys are in the allocation money tier, where they cost a lot of money. And if you could move them on, you'd free up a lot of money. So if they're going to be on the roster, you need them to be producing. You need them to be good, or at least serviceable and playing minutes and giving your team real value. And if not, if this goes upside down and the player is just unplayable, or he gets caught as the third string player or whatever, it's a guy you got to move on quick, because he's taking up so much of your roster values and what you can do with your roster.
This is almost the heart of the team, in my opinion, because these are the players that will determine what your average baseline is in terms of quality of the squad. You can obviously get a high-level DP. You can pay for a striker who's going to come in and score 25, 30 goals a season, and that you can base based on what their form in previous leagues are. But with these players, it's almost a bit of a gamble, because they will determine what your average quality is going to be across the board. And as you said, if you pay a certain fee to one right back who earns a lot higher than the rest of the defense or the backup options, then you're almost forced to play that right back on a regular basis, because you're paying so much money for them. And if they don't perform to the level that you expect them to, or what their salary demands, then you're kind of stuck with, okay, this is an expensive player who's not producing the quality that I require of him. How do you get him off the books? We saw that last year as well with a couple of players as well, where the likes of Gonzalo Lujan were earning so high. You saw Javier Mascherano wanted to start him, but eventually had to drop him because he wasn't playing to the quality that his salary was. So there's almost a dissonance between what they're offering to the team versus what we're paying them, and that can be very difficult. And of course, Gonzalo Lujan has sort of turned around his career. We can talk about that a little bit, but that can be a genuine concern for a coach when he's picking the starting 11, and it bleeds into your decision making as well.
The fourth group I wanted to mention is the U22 group. So these are the young players that may have a transfer fee involved. Generally, their salaries aren't that high, but because they have the transfer fee, and generally it's a relatively hefty transfer fee, like they have to fit into this U22 category. Now, these players have their cap charge brought down, so how much they're making and how much they cost is less relevant. What is relevant is that they're taking up a spot, and you only get 3 of them. Now, there are 5 players I'm going to mention here, but for right now, Inter Miami's 3 DPs are David Ajala, Matteo Sovetti, and Talasco Segovia.
U22s.
As U22s. I will also mention Benjamin Karnaski, who's a guy on loan, but is still at Inter Miami, and Toto Aviles, who we'll have a more robust conversation about in a few minutes, that are owned by Inter Miami, but that are on loan elsewhere. And as we're talking about, how do we get players off the roster in order to bring in new players to fill in? Toto Aviles is a guy that Inter Miami might be having a problem with now. So it's all relevant. But these guys, I think it's more about they're taking up a spot, and that spot could go to a better player, as opposed to, they're preventing you from figuring the math out elsewhere. But that is an important piece to this. And as you mentioned, these guys can also make themselves part of the heart of the team if they are good. And if they're not, and we see this across the league, sometimes these guys don't even really play, and they're just sort of, hopefully in a year or two they can make it work. And then the last group is the DPs. Similar idea with the U22s. It's not about how much they cost. It's not about the transfer fee. It's not about their salary. It's about they're taking up one of these slots, and that is so important. So obviously that's Lionel Messi, Rodrigo de Paul, and Herman Berterame. The salary doesn't matter to me as much, although they're all making good money. It's can they be impact players for your team?
And can you get more value from somebody else in that position?
It's about if they're taking up this spot or not.
Yeah.
And they are.
Yeah.
So, it becomes a problem if they're not impacting the game. Okay. There's 2 players I want to mention specifically quickly, or at the start, because I think they're worth commending. And one of the things that's always fun to do is go and see, who's making less than you thought they were. The first player I'll start with is Luis Suarez, who was making $1.5 million a year for the last couple of years at Inter Miami. This year, he's on $800,000. So he took almost a 50% pay cut to come back. We suspected that when he signed his contract, he was going to come back to a reduced role. We weren't sure if it was going to be behind a DP number 9, but I do think you have to give credit to him because he's given money up. He could have been worth a DP contract at any point in his Inter Miami career. He's never asked for one, and he's provided that level of value, especially in 2024. Now, he took an even smaller contract to still be a part of this team, and of course, that's a lot of money for a guy that doesn't play much, but as we've seen in recent games, he's still been able to come in and impact the team. So, Luis Suarez, what do you think?
No, that last part that you just said, I think is the most important to emphasize. If we were having this conversation, maybe, let's say, 5 weeks ago, we would have been like, okay, yeah, I think this is understandable. He doesn't get too many minutes off the bench. He's basically a piece to fill up the bench in case we need legs on the pitch later on in the games, and he's not contributing with goals and assists, so we don't really need to pay him that high. And I could have almost justified him taking half a pay cut to be here. But the fact that he's actually come in over the last few weeks almost galvanized the starting 11. Without him, it felt like things were falling apart. We're starting to build that chemistry again. He's contributing with assists. He's had a couple of goals to his name. He was on par with Berterame at some point in terms of his goal contributions. That, I think, makes me almost be thankful that he's decided to come in on a reduced salary and is finding a way to contribute to this team's success. Because my biggest concern with Luis Suarez was, if he's going to come back, is he going to have a mood about wanting to play regular minutes? Is he going to demand to start games? If not on a regular basis, then at least one game out of every 3. No, he's been a thorough professional. The fact that he's taken a pay cut to be here is brilliant. And then on top of that, the fact that he can contribute off the bench in some games, starting, trying to link up with Messi, get a few goals and assists from time to time as well. Just the value and the return on investment that we're getting right now from Luis Suarez is very high. And I think we should commend him. Thorough professional, taking a pay cut to be here. And he could be retired on a beach right now. He doesn't need to necessarily put his best foot forward for this team, and yet he continues to do that. And I think that's highly commendable, as much as I've criticized him over the past for his performances.
Yeah, and this is a guy who could have demanded a DP contract when he first came to Inter Miami.
Exactly.
He never did. And even this past year when Jordi Alba left and decided he was going to retire and there was a DP spot available, he didn't demand it. He said, even though he had 30-plus goal contributions last year, and like, given his career and given the actual stats from last year, you could see how a guy would want that kind of money, especially after he left money on the table the previous 2 seasons, and instead he took a big pay cut. So, like, I do think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And there's a chance he ends up being our best value for money player over the course of the season, which probably is not something we would have thought a couple months ago, but like I think maybe is now very much in the realm of possibility. The other player I want to mention is Dane St. Clair, who's just about the same. He took a contract with Inter Miami for $808,000. He was offered a $1.3 million contract from Minnesota in the offseason, so he took a $500,000 pay cut to come join Inter Miami. And I know we're not super thrilled with Dane St. Clair and his performance so far this season, but like I also think some appreciation should go that way for a guy who was coming off a big season and won MLS Goalkeeper of the Year to take a big pay cut to come to Inter Miami and wanted to be a part of this project, wanted to do what he had to do to get to be on this team. And so even if we're not going to call it good value for money at this point, like I do think there should at least be a fan recognition that he did give up something to come be a part of this. And maybe we could look back on him more positively because of that. That is one of the other things that really stood out to me in this.
Yeah, and I think there are 2 conversations here that stand out for Dane St. Clair. One, the fact that people were constantly calling for Rocco Rios-Novo to start some of the games recently. I think, yes, in terms of form, you could call that, but I think Inter Miami does not owe anything to say Dane St. Clair, but should respect the fact. Yeah,
I think they do owe him something.
Yeah, I was trying to find a more tempered way to say it, but maybe we should just say it as it is. They do owe Dane St. Clair at least a run of games so that ahead of the World Cup, he has the opportunity to prove that he is able to be the number 1 goalkeeper for Canada. And at the same time, give him a run of games to build into form if he's able to. I don't think that's really happened, but we owed him in terms of giving him those minutes, giving him those opportunities, given that he's taken a bit of a pay cut to be here and he's come to play with Messi, he's come to play for Inter Miami, and I think we should appreciate that. I don't know how long the DSC story is going to last at Inter Miami and whether we're going to see him after the World Cup as a number one. We'll talk about that maybe once we're closer to once we see how he performs at the World Cup and once the next couple of games are over. And the second point I want to make is this is the attraction of Inter Miami, right? Like big players, players who won the goalkeeper of the year in the MLS are willing to take a pay cut to come play for Inter Miami, come play with Messi. And I think that is something that the club really needs to value and build on, because we may not have this in a couple of years. So we need to make the most of this opportunity of being the brand that we are right now and capitalize on it in the summer transfer window, in the next transfer window, like have the opportunity for players to come play with Messi. And that in itself is a big attraction. And not many clubs can say that. So I think DSC is a good example of that. And that's probably also why you want to show that if he's taking a pay cut to be here, we're trusting him. And if someone else in the future decides to do that as well, we do want to give them all the opportunities that they possibly can get to showcase what their talents are. So the DSC story is very interesting. But as you said, I think we should appreciate the fact that he's taken a pay cut to be here. And let's see where this goes.
And it's one of the reasons we haven't been calling for his head or for Rocco to come into the starting 11.
Exactly.
Like he was in a very good position to ask for a lot of money, and he decided, I want to forget that. I want to come to Inter Miami and win trophies. And like, I do think the club owes him at least a certain amount of respect. And if that respect and delegation goes through the World Cup, like that's less than half a season for this guy who gave up a lot to come here. So like, I think that's fair. And at some point that will run out. But I think to this point, it's been pretty fair what the club has done. And I do think the club did owe him this. So those are the two I think that really stand out positively as guys that were making less than you were expecting. Is there any other player that you want to talk about specifically before we get into the big talking points?
Not really. I think the ones that I have on mind, we're eventually going to hit one way or another. But just talking about value for money and return on investment, I think the three players that we would highlight would be Ian Frey, Yannick Bright, and Noah Allen. They've been performing way beyond their pay grade. And that's so heartening to see. I know that's a conversation we're probably going to hit on again. But just while we're talking about players who are not earning nearly what they could have been earning elsewhere, that I think is important to recognize.
This is a side note, but it's relevant to what I'm about to say. I was watching some highlights from Inter Miami's victory in the club or performance in the Club World Cup last summer, and
Palmeiras.
I was listening to our podcast, and I started watching the Palmeiras highlights, and I watched Luis Suarez, and then I was like, okay, let me kind of relive the whole group stage, and we beat Porto, and I looked at the starting 11, and Inter Miami had 3 homegrown players in the starting 11 in a victory against FC Porto. Benjamin Kramaski started that game next to Sergio Busquets. Ian Frey started at center back, and Noah Allen was the starter at left back. So one of the things I think is made so clear in this salary dump is you look at the players that are offering value, to your point. It's Yannick Bright from the Super Draft. It's Noah Allen from the Academy. It's Ian Frey from the Academy. It's guys that have come in and been impact good players that helped you beat FC Porto, that helped you win the MLS Cup, that helped you break the points record in 2024. Those are the guys that are actually giving you the best value for money. And it feels like in each of these cases, Inter Miami went out and bought a more expensive player to come replace them, and it hasn't been worth it in any way, shape, or form. And the players above them, or the players that were brought in, are some of the least worst value for money players that Inter Miami has on the roster right now. I'll start with Sergio Reguilon, who's making $1.8 million. This is the maximum allowed without getting to DP status. I think he's a good player. And if he was starting every game,
I think he's a great player in the MLS.
Yeah. He would be worth it if he was starting every game.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, the injury concerns didn't start when he got here. Is it worth it or not? Because probably if he didn't have the injury concerns, he wouldn't be available to Inter Miami at all. So that is for each individual person to decide. But but that is one of them. And obviously he's the guy to come in and replace Jordi Alba. Making a fifth is Noah Allen, who is actually playing much of our left back this season. But I think the two more egregious ones, he's played fine, and I think he's played much better once we've switched to Guillermo Hoyos. Some of the more egregious ones, though, Yannick Bright has been here and has been great for the club, got a new contract, and it's 60% of what David Ajala is making. David Ajala is a U22, so the salary doesn't quite matter as much. But if you just trusted Yannick Bright, you would be in a position where you could go spend a U22 spot on another winger or on another center back somewhere else on the team. And it was because the team wasn't, I guess, willing to trust Yannick Bright that they went out and got David Ajala and are now sort of stuck with this player that's given them 250 minutes, if that, this season, and hasn't, even in the minutes he's had, hasn't looked particularly good. I like the player. I still think it's early, but like it's just such a clear and obvious example of we had a value guy on this team and we replaced him with a guy who's not actually good value for money. And we're thankful we still have the guy on the team. He stayed. He was going to be the backup. Instead, he's the starter and he's performing really well. And then the most egregious one is Ian Frey at right back, who's making similarly $430,000. And then you have Facundo Mora, who's making over $1 million. Came from Racing Club in Argentina. He's the fifth highest paid player on this team, just by salary, behind the 3 DPs and Sergio Reguilon. And like I feel bad in a sense because I don't think he's a bad player, but I don't think he has the physical capacity to really excel in this league. He's not particularly fast, and I think he gets blown by these really athletic, talented wingers that he goes up against. I think he's probably pretty smart, but like if you just can't do it, you just can't do it. And now here we have a guy who is at best a backup fullback on a team that's trying to win championships in this league, and he's your fifth highest paid player. And this one, just for the record, is the most egregious sort of value for money player we have right now. But it was like they didn't trust Ian Frey. And I can understand not trusting Ian Frey to be healthy for 90 minutes every single week because of his injury concern. But clearly, based on the salaries, you can see the plan was for Facundo Mora to come in and be the right back. And maybe Ian Frey will, get some games at right back and maybe some games at center back and maybe a game or two in the midfield. But they've come in and you can see he just doesn't have it in the same way. And that's unfortunate. We wish he did, but like now you're stuck with this player who no one in the MLS is going to take off your hands, not for that amount of money. No one in Argentina is going to take off your hands, not for that amount of money. And he's not good enough to really contribute positively on a regular basis. And again, he's the fifth highest paid player on this team. You would hope he's one of your stars. And instead, he's maybe not one of your 15 best players. And so I think the first half of this conversation is, okay, trust your academy kids. They've shown you they can take the next step and they come at a much better value. All of these players were going to, you were going to need another right back. You were going to need another midfielder. You were going to need a left back, but you could have gone much, much cheaper and made sure you've gotten, okay, we're going to get a solid player, but we're not going to overpay for it. We're not going to go out and try and get a superstar because we trust the guy that we have to be a really good player. That's the first half of this conversation. And then the second half of this conversation is, Noah Allen's not going to be here forever. Ian Frey's not going to be here forever. Benjamin Kramaski, who I just mentioned, is already in Europe. You have to replace them. And one of the things we talked about a lot, I get it's not the most popular topic, is taking the academy seriously. You have to bring in the next crop so that you constantly have this influx of quality players to give you good value for money so you can spend the money where you have to. And like I think this salary release was maybe the strongest point we've had so far of if you build through the academy, it is such an advantage in this league to save your resources if you can get quality players from South Florida. And I will just tell you right now, forget the 3 guys on Inter Miami's roster. There's a bunch of guys on Orlando City. There's guys on FC Cincinnati. There's quality players in a lot of teams in the MLS that came from South Florida and that could be on Inter Miami right now. And there's a lot of 16-year-olds that should be at Inter Miami right now in the academy and that have decided to go elsewhere because they don't love the way that Inter Miami has treated their development or, the success rate Inter Miami's had. So And of course, we're getting to a stretch here where there's a whole generation of players that just didn't come through. Once you get past Noah Allen and Ian Frey, there's like a 4-year gap between the next group of young kids, Daniel Pinto, Alexander Shaw, and we hope those kids become, high quality starters, but they're not there yet. They still need 2 or 3 years before they're going to get there. And so in that 2 and 3 year gap, what happened to those players that should have come through? Guys like Santi Morales, guys like Tyler Hall, they're sort of nowhere to be found. And so I don't know, wherever you want to start on this conversation, I know we've had it before, but it's like these numbers just show how obvious it is that if you go outside the MLS and you pay for a free agent from a different country, you might not get good value as if you had just spent an extra 10, 15 games a year helping this young kid grow into an MLS player.
I think there's two pieces to that first conversation itself. You use the word trust, right? There's one thing about trusting the academy and building players up, and there's almost an unknown associated with that because they're young players. They can show a lot of promise in the academies, and once they take the next step to the first team, maybe it doesn't pan out the same way. You do have to put in almost blind faith for these players to continue to develop on an upward trajectory. And that doesn't always happen at 100% hit rate. It could be 50-50. It could be maybe 60-40 in some cases. That's one piece of the conversation. And I can almost forgive the front office for, let's say, not trusting the academy and wanting to expedite some of the success that Inter Miami is trying to achieve by bringing in players from abroad who may be more established in foreign leagues and who they've seen could potentially contribute to the success of Inter Miami. I don't think that's the right approach. Let me put it that way, but I can almost understand why they would justify overlooking the academy in favor of bringing foreign talent in, or just talent in those positions by buying players that they've seen have established themselves elsewhere. We can talk about that in a second. But for me, the most egregious and the worst offense that this front office has made so far is all three players that you mentioned, Ian Frey, Noah Allen, and Yannick Bright, have proven that they can belong in a championship winning team. They've helped win the Supporters' Shield. They've helped break the points record. They've helped win the MLS Cup. These are all players who have time and again showcased that they are belonging to the highest level in the MLS. Yannick Bright is performing at the level of the best defensive midfielder in the league right now. And yet he has to constantly prove himself every time Inter Miami brings in a midfielder. He's the first one who gets benched. I promise you, if Casemiro comes in, Yannick Bright is going to be the first one who gets benched. And he's going to have to prove himself again why he should belong in the starting 11. You've talked about Ian Frey a lot as to why every coach who comes in puts him through a trial by fire. And inevitably, the ultimate decision is that Ian Frey gets slotted back into the right back position as a starter, because what we're getting from elsewhere is not the level that Ian Frey is producing on a regular basis. My question is, why do these players have to constantly go through that trial by fire time and time again, every time we change a coach, every time there's a new season? Why can't they just be treated as established starting 11 first team players now? I think up until a certain period, you can ask and expect them to prove themselves, but they've proven enough. They deserve your trust. They deserve that starting position. And the fact that you're willing to go out, spend so much money to bring someone else in and not value what you have, it's almost like you have a chicken at home who lays golden eggs, but you want to go out, you buy a cat, and you expect that cat to lay eggs. Like, why? You have a well-made golden chicken sitting at home. Use that and then spread your finances accordingly in a way that helps you build up other areas in the pitch and not just constantly try to improve an area that doesn't even need to be improved. It's almost mind-boggling and begs the question, who's determining the strategy behind it? And then that goes into the deeper question of how we're treating the academy in general and how we're just not trusting academy players to be contributive to this team in the same way as we bring in talent from elsewhere. Huge problem. And I think this is something we have to correct going forward, no matter what, because the value is so high in these players and you're not valuing them the same way.
Yeah, and listen, if you're the Portland Timbers, that's not a very soccer-rich part of the country. There's not a lot of great athletes coming from Oregon. There's a million South Florida kids that are professional athlete talented. there's going to be so many kids coming through, and part of that's going out and identifying them. Part of it is giving them an opportunity. And I especially want to criticize this current administration and Javier Mascherano's coaching staff for being particularly egregious sort of violators of this. Those kids we mentioned, Ian Frey, Noah Allen, Benjamin Kramaski, David Ruiz, you know what coach they came through under? Phil Neville. Like, that's the guy that gave them opportunities to prove themselves. Before Messi was here, before Jordi Alba was here, Noah Allen and Ian Frey were starting on the back line, and Kramaski was a breakout star. And like, it was only because they had already proven it were they even given opportunities moving forward. Now, I will credit Tata Martino because those particular players who had already made it, he did continue to develop them, but he didn't really bring through anyone. I guess, Yannick Bright is his one bring through, but and then with Javier Mascherano, it was just nobody. So, and it did feel like once Chris Henderson left, which would be around the summer of 2024, maybe left is the wrong word, but no longer a part of the decision-making process, which has certainly happened by the summer 2024. By that point, there's been no young players come through. Like, Yannick Bright was the last person, and that was sort of first half of 2024 when Tata Martino was, dealing with all these injuries and bringing guys and still giving kids opportunities. And listen, they don't all make it. We saw Inter Miami give opportunities to, Edison Azcona.
Leo
didn't make
Alfonso.
it. Leo Alfonso didn't make it. So, like, it's not that every kid's going to make it, but those kids got chances. They got 15
And they proved
games.
themselves. Like, sorry, yes, those kids got chances. They got the opportunities, and it's fine. They know they won't always make it.
They proved whether they were good enough or not. And you
Yeah.
know who we can't say that about? Santi Morales or Tyler Hall. Or Alexander Shaw so far. Now, Shaw is young, but I guess my point is there's a whole core of players that never got that opportunity. Brian Destin, I think, is the one that we're really going to have to pay attention to because he was just like this super speedy attacking player and just got forgotten by the club.
Poof.
And is now no longer with the club.
But you know what the worst part is? In the MLS structure, framework, the rules, this is a golden ticket. Because yes, as you said, it may not 100% be a hit rate, and that's fine. It's okay. You can move them on. But if it is a hit rate, like it is with 3 of the players that we just named, that's the golden ticket. That can be the difference between you winning the MLS Cup consistently versus you languishing in 4th or 5th. It blows my mind because it's how can you let go of this opportunity with these players when they've proven themselves time and again that they're here to belong.
And the other thing is, Inter Miami has maximized what their roster can be this year. There's only 14 players that are like not from the academy. So if you're a team with 14 players, you're going to struggle over the course of a season. You need the academy kids. You need the super draft picks to come through and give you player number 15 through 19. So you have a real squad, not just, your 11 starters plus a couple guys off the bench. Like, that's not a good way to be a successful team that competes on multiple fronts. And so, like, I've mentioned this a lot, but it really does scare me because Noah Allen might be gone this summer and Yannick Bright might be gone this summer and Ian Frey might be gone this summer. And it's like, if those guys leave, you're not replacing them because no one is going to come in at that value that's going to give you that amount of impact. So it makes me very nervous what Inter Miami's done. And I really think Javier Mascherano was really bad at this, but also this front office. And it's like, I think the front office also deserves a lot of blame because they have not taken the academy seriously. One of the things that's been very frustrating to me is the players that are really highly thought of, young teenagers, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds that the U.S. youth national team is looking at and thinks these guys have huge futures. They're in Inter Miami's academy. They're looking around. They're spending a year or two in the academy, and they're deciding, this isn't good enough for me. I have great options. I'm going to go to the best academy in the country and go break through there. And that's something Inter Miami has been seeing over the last couple of years where it does not feel like the front office is building the academy in a way that's going to supply these great talents with great opportunity and great development. And that's a 2-part conversation. But we saw it against Orlando City they had a kid, starting striker for them, that got an assist that helped them beat Inter Miami. He was in Inter Miami's academy 2 years ago, and he went to Orlando City, Justin Ellis, because he didn't feel like Inter Miami was going to develop him in the way that he thought was appropriate, and that's particularly egregious because he was already here. Like they didn't have to sell him with a PowerPoint. They could show him every day what they were doing, and they failed. And I will just tell you that he's not the last guy. There was a player from Cincinnati that's from Boca Raton, which is 20 minutes from Dry Pink Stadium, that he started for FC Cincinnati this weekend in the midfield. Like, there are plenty of guys. Inter Miami has to do a better job of keeping them, and part of keeping them is showing them how we're going to get you not just to a first-team contract, but to meaningful minutes in the first team and then eventually onto Europe. And it felt like Inter Miami was doing that really well for a time, and they had lots of success stories, and it's completely dried up. And it does absolutely coincides with the front office turnover, and then even worse once the Mascherano coaching staff came in and really cut that off. So,
and that gap is not going to affect you now, perhaps. It's going to affect you in the future. That's something that youth academy gap is going to have its impact and hangover 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. And that's when you're going to feel it the hardest.
It could be right now, actually. Because if you lose Ian
Yeah.
Frey, and if you lose Yannick Brighton, if you lose Noah Allen this summer, it's here. It's here this season. And you're not going to be able to make it up by next summer. So it's like, I don't actually think it's that far away from us really starting to feel it. I think 3 years from now, we might be okay again, because Alexander Shaw is a guy that's going to come through, and Daniel Pinter might be ready to really impact the team. But there's this gap that they just missed, and it's really frustrating. Okay. My second big takeaway from this: stop buying players from Argentina. Sorry. I want to be so clear.
You'll have to be very precise with the language
No,
that you use here, given the
thank you.
reaction that we've seen
Thank you.
already to your comment
Thank you.
previously. So
That is not what I meant.
I'll give you time. Be clear, be precise, take your time. You have the floor.
That is not what I meant. I want to take that, strike that from the record. Stop buying players from the Argentine League. Stop buying players from the Argentine League. I'm totally happy with as many Argentines as can come. Like, that's fine. But I want them to prove it anywhere else. I want them to prove they're so good in the Argentine League that they can get a move to Brazil or to Mexico or to Spain or whatever. Because, man, if you look at the history of Inter Miami's signings from Argentina, and specifically the Argentine League, the LPF, it is such a profligate waste of money. Basically, there's no player that was good value for money that they bought. I think we're very hopeful Matteo Silvetti breaks that trend. But when you're talking about a dozen players that have come through from that league and virtually none of them give you good value for money, like, it just gets to a point where they can't continue going there as a source of player talent when you're not getting player talent for reasonable prices. And it's been on and on and on and on and on. I've talked about this a couple times in the past, but this salary release was just another reminder. Facundo Moura is the big culprit of this. He's the fifth highest paid player on the team. He was a free agent, and he was, I guess, good at Racing last year, and River Plate wanted him. That doesn't mean it's going to translate. It's not going to translate to the MLS. And there are reasons for that. The Argentine League is slower. It's not as in-your-face intense. It is more technical. And the players that come from there are going to be more technically refined, and they're going to have probably a better tactical understanding of what's happening. Like, I'm not saying the league sucks. I'm not saying there aren't quality skill sets built in that league. I'm just saying they don't translate to MLS that well. And for the players that are so good that it doesn't matter, they cost too much. So I'm sure there are good players there that would come to the MLS and be fantastic, but they're not good value for money because the Argentine League has plenty of money, so they can pay their guys sort of high market rates. And so when you're in an MLS environment where you have to make every dollar count, it no longer becomes a good value for money. He is not the only player on this team that is in this exact same situation. Gonzalo Lujan is making too much money for what he's giving. Facundo Moura making too much money for what he's giving. If you want me to go through the list of all of Inter Miami's signings from that league, I will. But
yes.
Julian Carranza, terrible waste of money. Matias Pellegrini, terrible waste of money. Nico Figal was okay. Like, maybe worth it, maybe. But that's it. Franco Negri did not give you much. Facundo Farias, lost a lot of money on him. Toto Aviles, who we'll talk about more in a minute, gonna end up losing a lot of money on him. Federico Redondo, they bought for $9 million and they sold him for $2 million. They sold him for like 23%
That was a
of
major
what they bought
loss.
him
Yeah.
for after 18 months. And we saw he was a very highly thought of prospect. $9 million was a fair fee for him at the time by the standards of that league, but he just never had the capacity to operate in this league and the intensity and speed that this league has in an effective way on a continuous basis. Like it was just
And
never.
he was always judged
never
by his
there.
price tag, right? Like he never justified his price tag.
Chelo Wegant last year, his first season.
I want
was
him
making
back
about,
now.
Well,
Because of what we're paying for Kunahura.
his first season he was making about 400,000, which is okay for a backup fullback because that's what he ended up being. Ian Frey outplayed him.
Yeah.
His second season was making 830,000, which is starter good fullback in the MLS, and he was a backup to Ian Frey. So it's like that's too much money. It's too much money. David Martinez was making a lot of money. Gonzalo Lujan is making a lot of money. Facundo Mora is making way too much money. So that's you just can't do that. The only other players they bought, Baltasar Rodriguez, who they had him on loan, so it was fine. But they never, if they had to buy him, if they ended up buying him, it would have been a bad use of money. And Silvetti's hopefully the exception that proves the rule. But like it's just a bad place. There are reasons it's a bad place to go to. It doesn't translate that well. They have plenty of money, so they don't sell players cheaply. The players there are well paid, so they don't take discounts. Any idea that they were going to take discounts to play with Lionel Messi, I think has been disproven over the course of the last couple of years. Like that hasn't been something that's actually taken place. So like I think they got to stop going there. There's just not good value for money. And if you want to say it's Inter Miami's fault for not scouting the better, more appropriate players, fine. But then they've proven they can't do it. They've proven
their value will
do
be
it, so.
sky high if that's the case. Because I think the issue Inter Miami is facing right now is not just the fact that this is not a stylistic fit. Yes, we can talk about that absolutely, and that you can essentially find players who can play different styles. But Inter Miami is not able to scout them the way that you would want to, as you just said. But also, the more important point here is the overvaluation of these players. They're priced too high for what they're actually worth. And for some reason, Inter Miami is willing to pay that price for this, but it's just not worth it. The return on investment that you get for the players that you're scouting and trying to sign, they're asking too much of a high price for them. And Inter Miami keeps paying them. It just does not give us what we want. And then we have to go back, either sell these players, move them on, or we have to replace them in some way. It's lose-lose in both cases, and it's not worked out so far. The case study, the sample size is too large now to ignore it. As simple as that.
And to Inter Miami's sort of credit, I can understand why this was an idea you went with when Messi first came here. You wanted to make a culturally, you had the opportunity to go recruit these players, and you wanted a culturally comfortable locker room for all of the new players you were bringing in. So you can understand why you did it when Messi got here. But you've had so many examples of guys that just haven't lived up to the value. Can I give you some numbers on transfer fees that we paid?
Go on.
Toto Aviles, we paid $7.5 million. I think that's the most expensive center back signing in MLS history.
That's insane.
CF Montreal is one of the worst teams in the league, and they don't want him on loan.
He
they
can't
want
even
to cut
make
his
their
loan short.
bench. Yeah.
And I think he's the most expensive center back in the history of the league. Matteo Silvetti cost $6.5 million. That's like he might be the exception. Federico Redondo cost $9 million. Facundo Farias cost $5.5 million. And then obviously when we go back to Pellegrini and Carranza, they cost like $15 million combined.
Yeah.
Like it's just a bad use of money. You know what was a good use of money? Going to Paraguay and spending $2.5 million on Diego Gomez. Diego Gomez cost like a third or a quarter of what Redondo cost, or a third of what Toto Aviles cost, and he provided 10 times the value. And by the way, this is irrelevant because they're U22s, but his salary was lower. Like he didn't he didn't make as much money. Talasco Segovia, they got him from Portugal. Some big clubs in Portugal. Cost $2.5 million. He's making $360,000 this year. He's so low in terms of the price to get him and the salary that you could convert him out of U22 status. And that's Portugal. It's not like
And
Zimbabwe or
he's,
something.
I think, top 5 players on this team.
Yeah, Talasco Segovia is a guy that had played against Porto and had played against Benfica. Like, it's not like he's an unknown. It's not like you are asking someone from the Angolan league to come in and be a star for you. Like, that's a good level. The Primeira Liga in Portugal is a good level, and you got him for $2.5 million. So, and I by the way, I think that was the club record incoming transfer fee. So there are good players across South America and across Europe that you can get for much, much cheaper. Those two guys that we bought not from Argentina are going to be the two guys that make us enough money to make up for all the losses we had elsewhere.
To then go and spend again on losses.
Yeah, but it's like if you keep going and getting $2.5 million players, and again, like I'm not suggesting it's easy, but you can get a $2.5 million quality player from anywhere outside the top 4 or 5 clubs in Portugal, from Paraguay, from wherever. And if it doesn't work, you know what? It's a lot easier to move on a guy that costs you $2.5 million than it is to move a guy that costs
low
you
risk,
$9
high
million.
reward.
Yeah. So like I really just, they have to stop going to Argentina, even for the players that aren't U22s, Gonzalo Lujan, Facundo Mora as recent examples. Like, it's just not good value for money.
And
Nico
then they
Freire,
demand starting minutes, and that just messes up the entire balance of the team, right? Because when you're paying so much for a player, you have to start them, and the quality is just not there. It's just not there. And nobody can sit here in front of me and tell me with a straight face that Inter Miami is a better team when Facundo Mora is starting over Ian Frey. You can't. You
or
can't
Noah
say that.
Allen at left back.
Yeah.
Like, they're just okay. I want to just reemphasize, this is not about Argentines. We've had plenty of good Argentine players. Matias Rojas, who had earned his way out of the Argentine league and had time in Brazil to adjust to the intensity of that league, came here and was really good. Tadeo Allende went to Spain, and like, I know he didn't light up in Spain, but it meant he was good enough to get out of Argentina and then spend a year training in and around players from La Liga. That changes who you are as a player, and it changes the speed of your mental clock and everything, and it allows you to come here and be a more impactful player. Like, and not to mention the Messis and the Rodrigo de Pauls and stuff.
I don't think those are part of the conversation.
Okay, but my point is, it's not about
Yeah.
being Argentine or not.
Yeah.
It's about coming from that league. I don't think that league translates well, and I think there's enough money in that league that you don't get bargains or good deals or anything. Like, there are other places where you can get better value. And I think Inter Miami should be pursuing those other places more aggressively. And then the last thing we should talk about is Toto Aviles, who
What's
might
going
be a
on
problem.
there, man?
He might be a problem for Inter Miami because they have no U22 spots. They loaned him to CF Montreal for the regular season. Apparently, news broke yesterday that they have told Toto Aviles he's not going to play again for the rest of his loan. And so they're going to try and get him sent back to Miami. Now, from what I understand is Miami could choose to just leave him there and force Montreal to keep him. But of course, if he's not going to play, then he's going to lose value. And the whole point of this loan was to help him rebuild some value. So maybe you could move him on for some sort of reasonable price. That's obviously not going to happen. I don't know if Inter Miami brings him back and tries to loan him back to Argentina. But yeah, that's the big update is CF Montreal, who again is one of the least talented teams in the MLS, is ready to move on from Toto Aviles. I'll be honest, I wouldn't think it's possible to put him back on this roster, but I actually think he could play a role.
But he'll take up a U22 spot, and we're probably going to have to take.
It's right. I don't think it's possible.
We'll probably
to
bring down
actually make that
Talasco Segovia if we have to, but I just don't think it's feasible. And also, like, do we know what the reason is why it hasn't worked out in Montreal? Is it a Toto Aviles thing?
He just hasn't been good enough.
Yeah, that's a fall from grace. I do think there's a role for him here if it was the same level that he played last season, but
2 years ago.
2 years ago. It's been 2 years already. Can't believe it. No, this is not a good look, both on Toto Aviles and what it means for our summer business. And damn, I think the team in the front office will try and send him on to loan somewhere else. And I'm pretty sure Argentina, there'll be some team that's willing to take him, but we'll see. We'll
But
see.
you're gonna lose a lot of money, right?
I
Again,
think at this point you're going to have to do that.
he was the most expensive center back in MLS history. $7.5 million.
And he was an exciting prospect. So I'd be interested to understand what went wrong there. But
That's another player I'll blame Mascherano for.
yeah.
So, anyways, guys, that's the roster update. I will say maybe we should spend a minute or two talking about how this affects things for the summer and what Inter Miami can do moving forward. They have no money, no allocation money left. So
No
they have no
allocation,
wiggle
yeah.
room. They can't do anything. They can't get another international roster slot. They can't add any players. They can't give a player a nice signing bonus for having a good game. Can't do any of it. They're locked in for the rest of the season. And by the way, that means they're not going to have much allocation money next year at this rate because you can roll over your allocation money. So if you really wanted to build your war chest, you could get some this year and just save it for next year. Maybe this is a own conversation. We just have a sneak peek for a conversation we'll have in the next couple of weeks, but I think they got to do a lot of work this summer.
I think we were right in suggesting that the first part of the season is going to be a phase in itself, and the second part of the season is going to look probably very different. I expect there to be a lot of movement on this Inter Miami roster, not just in terms of incomings, but also outgoings, because without the outgoings, the incomings aren't happening. I will be fully expecting the likes of Yannick Bright, Noah Allen, Ian Frey to be having conversations at least about a potential move abroad, potential move anywhere. I'm not sure if any of those will actually materialize, but we've already started hearing about Noah Allen, and I
Though-
think there's
I want to stop you because that is possible. I don't want to take that away, but I don't know if that's the thing we've learned from looking at these numbers.
no.
I think the thing we've learned by looking at these numbers is actually more interesting. Where Facundo Mora is making over $1 million, I don't think he can be on the team next year.
no.
Like I think it's got to be a 1-year thing, and that sucks. But I don't think he has the requisite athletic ability to play well in this league on a regular basis. I think you're really looking at a buyout of his contract. By the way, I should just mention this is not the first time they've chosen a good young Inter Miami homegrown player that's on a high, that's giving you solid production on a relatively low budget charge, and gone with a much more expensive player that's given them less. Thinking about the goalkeeping situation over the last 2 years. But anyways,
No,
like
but my
there just
point
has to be a
about
shift in how they think about these.
yeah, but my point about Ian Frey, Noah Allen, Yannick Bright was you can potentially get allocation money from there, right? That's one way to unlock some allocation money.
Yes, you can.
So
same thing with Benjamin Kramaski. All
Yeah.
4 of those guys came for free, and so if you sell them for a profit, you can convert up to $3 million of that into allocation money. Now, I would imagine Inter Miami's going to try and stagger that so they get the full $3 million this year and then $3 million next year. So maybe that includes some player on a loan with a purchase option or
Yeah.
something. So I guess we'll keep that in mind. But I'm looking at the high earners. Dane St. Clair, $800,000. I know we talked about how we want to give him, time, but Rocco Rios Novo is making like $225,000.
peanuts.
That's a lot of money you can save if you can move Dane St. Clair, and Dane St. Clair is a guy that other teams will want because of his reputation and his standing in this league. David Ajala frees up a U22 spot. He's not providing a lot for Inter Miami. If you can sell him to a different club in MLS for an international roster slot next year or 2, you take those, which means you save the allocation money you'd have to spend next year to acquire those, and you free up a U22 spot. Like that.
But
that
isn't he
makes
only
lot
on a
of sense to
1-year
me.
contract? So
Yeah, but if you're a contending team and you need a midfielder, is that not
Yeah.
worth it?
yeah. So you'd sell him this summer.
I would sell him this summer.
Yeah, that's
or
what.
trade
Yeah.
him. Yeah. Like I think Inter Miami has to have serious conversations about these types of things because, like, I like the idea of David Ajala. I don't think we've seen enough to know exactly what he is, but I like the idea of him. But I don't think it's going to work out at Inter Miami because of the guys in front of him. And if they sign Casemiro, he's just never going to play.
That's a whole other story. Yeah.
Don't just hold on to this asset when you have no allocation money. If you can turn him into some international roster slots, some allocation money for next year, do it, because he's going to walk for free. Dane St. Clair is going to leave for free. Facundo Moura and Gonzalo Lujan are two guys, even though Lujan's playing well. If you bought those guys out, you could bring in another center back for that value. Just don't get it from Argentina. Also, I do want to say, there was this rumor about Leandro Paredes. I do know he's in Argentina right now. He's at Boca Juniors. Doesn't fit the same category as what I'm talking about, because he's done it in Europe. But you could go get a guy for, Mikael is making less money than both Lujan and Facundo Moura. You can go get another Mikael for the same price if you buy him out, if you buy Gonzalo Lujan out. I think those are real things that Inter Miami should be trying to do, because as much as I've enjoyed Lujan's renaissance this year, I still don't think he's playing at that level to require that. So, and by the way, Lujan's making $921,000. He also has a transfer fee that makes the cap charge even worse. So, I think Inter Miami needs to do some work here. I really do, and I don't think they should wait till the offseason, because then you lose the opportunity to get value for guys like Dane St. Clair and David Ajala. So, I think there's work to be done, man. I really do.
Exciting summer coming up. There's a lot of potential movement happening, and I think Inter Miami is one team that never stays quiet. So if they want to bring in Casemiro, if there's conversations about these, there's going to have to be some hard decisions made, and we'll see how they unlock some of the levers.
You know what else we didn't talk about at all?
Bertrame. I knew it.
He's making $4 million. He's made $1 million per goal basically this season. Doesn't even include his transfer fee. Rodrigo de Paul, third highest paid player on his in the MLS in his salary. He also had, I think, the third or fourth, one of the 5 highest transfer fees in MLS history, incoming transfer fees, and is the third highest paid player in MLS. The only 2 players paid more than him are Lionel Messi and Heung-min Son.
Heung-min Son, yeah. What tells me most is a lot of these players are not earning commensurate salaries to what their production on the field is, and that's not good.
And I think you can look at the trends and see where Inter Miami's messed up.
Yeah,
and so that's why I keep saying this thing about the Argentine league. It's this is a trend. It's been a trend for the last 3 years. You're wasting too much money there. So that's why I say that. That doesn't mean there won't be good value from Argentine players from that league. And, we've been hoping that maybe Matteo Silvetti will be the guy. But, it's just a trend, and it's dumb to keep repeating it over and over again. Okay, guys. As I mentioned at the beginning, but in case you didn't hear, we are recording this on Saturday, the day before the Portland Timbers game, which means by the time this comes out, we may have signed Casemiro. We may have signed Leandro Paredes. There might be huge news. We might have hired a new coach. I don't know. But the reason we didn't talk about any of those things is because we're recording this before any of it happened. So if there was any big news that we missed, a big alien abduction or whatever, World Cup roster snub, whatever it is, that's the reason. And, we'll get to it when we get back. But hope you guys had a lovely time watching this episode. I'm Scotty. That was Saur. And this was the Dry Pink Dialogue. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this, and have a wonderful day.